Hello, everyone. I'm Blair Casey, the chair of the International ALS M&D Alliance's Innovation and Technology Advisory Council. And we are very proud to be here and give you an update on the work that we've done. Join with me, we have Jarnell Chudge and Richard Cave. And this past year, we've put a significant amount of work into our focus areas, which we'll touch on in a minute. But who are we? We're obviously representations of every ALS M&D organization around the world. And as representatives of our respective organizations around the world, our missions may differ, but as members of the International Alliance of ALS M&D Associations, we share common focuses, building capacity through community and capability. So the ITAC's mandate and purpose is to make recommendations regarding innovation and technology strategies in line with the Alliance's strategic goals and principles, which will benefit those living and affected by ALS M&D globally. So let me tell you a little bit more about what we've been up to. What you'll be hearing about today is our rationale for the strategic focus areas that we've decided upon, which is voice preservation and artificial intelligence. When you hear about voice preservation, you'll get a project update, and these are the broader considerations that we have thought about, the collaborations that we've worked on, and then really focusing in on the governance and integrity, and also looking at challenges and opportunity. With voice preservation, obviously a lot of the hype lately has come around artificial intelligence. So right now, the ITAC is formulating our position on artificial intelligence. We'll be working with leaders in the technology industry as well as people living with ALS M&D to participate to see how the technologies that are rapidly advancing in the general consumer market can be used for people living with ALS and M&D. So I'm very excited about having everybody here today, and I'm very proud of all the work that our team has done. And I'll kick it off, handing it to Jarnell.
Thank you, Blair. Now, there are a number of reasons why we chose voice preservation as a project area. The research in the field, supported by expert opinion too, stressed its importance to personal identity and self-expression. Our voice, it's like an audio fingerprint. It identifies not only who we are, but as an instrument, it's used to convey more than just information. It conveys emotion, feeling, and is an essential part of how we communicate with each other in a meaningful way. Now, the purpose of the project is to establish a global understanding of what's currently available, and to look at how we could design and build a sustainable foundation where eventually anyone in any part of the world will be able to use it. And key to our approach was to make sure that we had the human or person-centric perspective and went to the effort to understand the needs of each individual. Certainly understanding the role that technology needs to play, not just in developing a solution, but how that solution will need to work in different parts of the world where, for example, bandwidth or storage may be expensive. And finally, looking at it from a business perspective, thinking about it as an ecosystem where the costs and benefits would amount to creating sufficient value to not only make it doable, but sustainable too. This outlines then why we chose Colombia as a place to start. Firstly, we deliberately chose a country from the global south, one where English isn't predominant as a language, and where the environment is very different to the usual places such as North America and Europe. Plus, it helped that the Alliance had a very strong relationship with Acela, and we'll come to that in a moment. Now, our starting point to understand voice preservation, as illustrated by this experience map, was to model the end-to-end experience in a generic way, to help identify the core components of an individual's journey, regardless of where they may be in the world. This level of abstraction allowed us to then flesh out each part from a number of different perspectives. We started with an emotional flow, which intends to capture and convey not just the activities a person and their family are undertaking in relation to voice preservation, but how they might be feeling, in particular, their concerns and anxieties and so on. This then allows us to think about how we can help address these low points through people, information, training, education, and so on. Some of the key inflection points that we noted in this diagram were to do with the importance of being able to engage with professionals as soon as possible, the speech and language therapists, so that the voice preservation journey could be started as early as possible after diagnosis. Or, as we learned in the case of Colombia, where diagnosis can take up to 2 years, to start that process even before then. Now, the other lenses we reflected on in the diagram were looking at the role that technology could play in each of the steps, ranging from learning about voice preservation, capturing and storing the voice recordings, and the process then of transforming them into something usable. And not shown here, but we also developed a perspective of the value that this would provide to the different groups and stakeholders involved in the ecosystem, such as the technology developers, the voice providers, the role of government in terms of policy and regulation, healthcare professionals, advocacy groups around the world, and so on. And with that, I'll hand over to Richard to talk in more detail about our collaboration with Acela.
So, as Jardel was saying, we've been working with a lot of people as a part of this project. And from the start, we engaged with speech-language therapists locally to define their roles and responsibilities, to understand the scope and actually how they work with people living with ALS. And of course, most importantly, what means success for this project. The most important thing, also is that if we're going to build something for people with ALS, we need to involve them. And so even as early as this in the project, we are working directly with people with ALS for the design, the development, the partner collaboration, the delivery, the support, everything, all working together so we get and we learn from the best people at the best time. And of course, we have to ensure that we're doing stuff properly. Data is important. So we are ensured that we cover and we comply with all legal and regulatory requirements. And of course, we have ethics. And we're thinking ahead of time about how we can tell this story and how we can share with people what we're going to deliver, because awareness is really important. If we just build something and no one knows about it, it's just going to be a big waste. So, and then once we've delivered here, we're going to scale out to South Africa and Iceland, and then who knows where.
Thank you, Richard. In the following slides, and I'll go through them relatively quickly, I wanted to share a few highlights from the Fundamental Rights Survey the Alliance provisioned earlier this year. We used it as an opportunity to get a better sense globally of the voice preservation landscape so that we could then have a better picture of the current state of affairs. Now, the key findings shown on this particular slide is that over 50% of the survey respondents weren't aware of voice preservation at all, and that this was much higher in the global south than in English-speaking countries in general. There were a few anomalies that we uncovered, and we're looking into understanding those better. But key takeaway here is just the lack of awareness. Here, and to reinforce the previous slide, almost 3/4 of respondents weren't sure about voice banking services available in their country. And we know that voice banking itself is a precursor to voice preservation. Once again, just illustrating the gap that we're trying to address with this particular project. And finally, through this slide here, we wanted to point to the ubiquity of phones around the world at over 80%, and with computer access at 60% being quite a bit lower. However, it's worth noting that 6% have no access to technology at all. This, I think, helps point to ensure that the design of our solution, the way that we're thinking about it, must take into account the devices and technology that people use or have access to in order to make the contribution and have the impact that we wanted to have. I'll now move over to our second area of focus at the Council, AI. Now, there's not a single day that goes by where it's not making the news, and I'm sure we're all using it or talking about it or thinking about it in one way or another. From the perspective of the Council, I wanted to share how we're thinking about it and, in line with our mandate, the approach that we're taking to develop our position and make recommendations on its design and use in relation to ALS. So what is AI? Now, it refers to the intelligence of machines or software as opposed to the intelligence of humans or animals. And it's at a point now where the technology is able to perform tasks that require human intelligence, or what we would conceive of as human intelligence, such as reasoning, learning, decision-making, being able to process natural language, and so on. The AI models are all based on mathematical or computational representation of the data that is fed into them, and this in turn can generate outputs or predictions based on the inputs that are provided. And that these inputs themselves refer to AI models which can be trained on large amounts of data using various AI techniques, such as machine learning, deep learning, computer vision, case-based reasoning, and so on. And then more recently, we have the advent of generative AI. This is built on foundation models which are able to generalize and demonstrate an understanding of natural language and perform general tasks, and now have the capability to generate new text, images, and audio based on the instructions that are provided. Here, I list out several different areas where AI and ALS come together, and just picking on a few of these. So there's already work underway where AI is helping researchers and scientists to identify risk factors and biomarkers for ALS, and in turn helping in the development of new drugs and therapies. For example, by focusing on specific genes to target for treatment or management of ALS. An area that we feel really strongly about is using AI to improve access to education and training, and thereby looking at ways in which access to resources is improved and made available to healthcare professionals around the world, allowing them to have greater impact in the work that they do. So trying to make access in many ways as democratic as possible, regardless of where you are, is, I think, one of the key parts that we're thinking about here. Now, as you can see, the list of challenges in relation to AI is long. And when brought together and presented in this way, it's a very, very complex and challenging undertaking. Therefore, something which requires reflection and consideration. So how do, for example, we address the inherent bias that exists in the data sets currently in use and ensure they better represent the diversity of the population, situation, environments that we're dealing with? Not only will this help enrich the models and make them better over time, but thinking also about the design principles for current and future models, which make them inclusive and representative by default. What's the problem of the black box and not being able to explain the process by which AI arrives at an outcome or recommendation is concerning to so many people, particularly in the research and scientific community, where we know that traceability and provenance is so important. And governance and ethics, rightly so, in the news when it comes to the use of AI. And closely tied to that is the current environment in which these systems and technologies operate, and the goals and motivations of the companies that control much of them. So what does this actually mean for openness and interoperability, for affordable access that's accessible by everyone, and in turn help support sustainability, drive equality and fairness as well? As you can see, there is much to consider, leading then to what's the approach the Alliance is taking. Now, for us, we intend to work with the ALS community to prepare and publish a white paper, hopefully in the first part of 2024, where we'll outline our position regarding AI and present the principles, values, and the informing philosophy for the position we present and the recommendations that we want to be able to make. Key to this will be inviting feedback and input from the member organizations and councils to ensure their views are reflected in the work, so that it's representative of the Alliance and reflects the range of different environments and sociocultural perspectives that the members bring. Now, we're looking forward to working with you on this, and I've listed out some of the emerging themes for consideration, and we'll start reaching out to set up meetings and focus groups for early in the new year. Until then, thank you again, and we'll now open up to any questions or feedback.
Welcome back, Richard. Welcome back. Okay. So, any questions for Richard and Jamal, who's online? Yep, thank you.
Hello. Okay, my name is Rick from the UK. I was quite taken aback by the statistic that over 50% of people in the Global South knew nothing of voice preservation. I just wondered how that compares with the proportion of smartphone ownership in the Global South, and whether we have a figure we can put on that at this stage.
I could talk a bit about that, and then I could hand over to you, Janelle.
Sure.
Yeah, I think if people have never had the opportunity to even think about voice banking, it's no surprise. And actually, voice bank for ALS, M&D, of course, there are no dress rehearsals for it. So why should anybody know about voice banking? And this is a big challenge for us, even in the UK. There's a big challenge because there's a huge turnover of speech therapists. There's all sorts of going on, and opportunities to train people to feel confident enough to even talk about it. So it doesn't surprise me. The other thing about the Global South is language, because there are so few options for people to voice bank in the language that they choose. So there's all sorts of challenges here, and what I found for speech therapists certainly is that I'm only going to talk about stuff I'm confident about, like what would happen when the patient actually asks me to do something. And I get that sense with technology as well, and voice banking. And to your other point, I think it was really well said about mobile phones. When we talk about Global South and other areas, like I was in Ghana twice this year talking about voice banking and all sorts of other things. Most people have an Android phone. And if they have any technology, it'll be an Android device, and it's likely to be low powered. So there are limitations there as well in terms of how voice banking will work, because it's got to work on the technology they have with the power of technology and the support they have. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Janelle?
Just the point in terms of the statistics. We had during the survey just over 82%, I think it was, in terms of people with access to a phone, and that was, I guess, taken as an average across all of the different countries covered. But certainly Richard, your point based on your experience in Ghana, I think it's also reinforced with the close work that we've been doing with Estella in Colombia as well, where once again, Android is the most common device that people have, and one of the things that we're certainly very mindful of is we know that there's a pretty broad range of capabilities that Android devices have, depending on how old they are, how costly, etc. So for us, it's going to be really important that we have a good understanding of those capabilities and make sure that the solution that we're ultimately working towards is capable of supporting as many devices as possible.
Mm. And just to add, why does this matter? Why does any of this matter? Well, Jana mentioned it, and Blair mentioned it as well, that there is evidence that, that having a device that people use to communicate that sounds more like them is a positive factor for them using the device more rather than less. So there are positive, and people often talk about preserving identity. And these are really important topics that people should have the choice to actually make their own decisions on it. But in order to make their own decisions on it, they need to be informed, and that's why this project is so important. Particularly in the Global South, but actually everywhere, because it's actually really hard to share such an abstract concept at an early enough appropriate stage.
Yes, and sorry, just to add to that as well. One of the questions that came up in the PCAC presentation was, I guess, differences between different countries. And I think it was pointed out on the panel that one of the major challenges is equal access to technology. And I think this is also one of the reasons why we wanted to tackle this project in the way that we did around voice preservation, looking at Colombia, South Africa, Iceland as being quite diverse, but also helping us understand how the different ways that technology is used in those places can throw insight into the way that we think about and design that, with that objective, with that goal of making a difference, trying to use technology as an equalizer.
Thank you, Jamal. And if you please join me in thanking Jamal and Richard, and also Blair, who was on the presentation. So thank you.